If captured alive, what would America have done with Osama bin Laden? The mastermind behind the deadliest terrorist attack in modern history was killed in 2011 by U.S. Navy SEALs. But what if things had gone differently? What if he had survived the raid? We can consider the methods, ethics, and machines built to hold a man like him. Black site interrogations to solitary confinement at the most secure prison in the States, ADX Florence. Today on Sketchy Tunes, we'll be taking a detailed look at how Osama bin Laden would be treated in prison, hour by hour. Before diving into how the US may have treated what could have been the most dangerous man in their custody, we must understand who Osama bin Laden was and why he became such a high-value target. Osama bin Laden was the founder and head of Al-Qaeda, a militant Islamist organization responsible for numerous terrorist attacks against Western affairs. Born into a wealthy Saudi family in 1957, bin Laden became radicalized during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. He used his wealth and connections to build a network of jihadist fighters and ideologies, founding Al-Qaeda in 1988. His goal was to expel Western influence from the Muslim world and establish a global Islamic caliphate. Bin Laden is most infamously known for orchestrating the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States, intentionally crashing 4 hijacked planes into the Twin Towers in New York City and the Pentagon in Virginia, killing nearly 3,000 people. This act forever changed global geopolitics. Following 9/11, he became the face of terrorism, prompting a worldwide manhunt led by the US. Despite years in hiding, bin Laden was located and killed in Pakistan in 2011. But for the sake of this exploration, we will instead embark on a speculative reconstruction of what might have happened in the hours, days, and years following his hypothetical capture. Hour 0 to 1. The moment bin Laden is captured, the clock begins. He would likely have been flown immediately to a CIA black site, facilities that operated in secret, far from Geneva Conventions, far from the jurisdiction of U.S. courts, far from the protections of international law. Perhaps Bagram, the largest U.S. military base in Afghanistan at the time. Perhaps a classified black facility in Poland, Lithuania, or Morocco. A distant desert or tundra landscape. There would be no Miranda rights, no lawyer, no chargers, no phone call, no way of escape. His captors would shroud him in darkness, hooded, shackled, stripped of identity. A tactical extraction team would escort him to a modified military or intelligence outpost, specially outfitted for what the government called enhanced interrogation techniques. He would be photographed, documented, and examined. Personal identifiers would be removed. From the outset, the strategy is to dehumanize, in total dominance of body and mind. And then, the sudden, violent silence of an interrogation room. Hours 2 to 12. Interrogation begins not with questions, but with removal. Bin Laden would enter isolation, not as punishment, but as procedure. It would begin with the elimination of sound, light, and time. He would have been locked in a windowless, soundproof cell. Picture a white, empty, cold room. Bright lights would remain on 24/7, removing any natural sense of day or night. Bin Laden would have been stripped naked and fitted with earmuffs. This is called sensory deprivation, a tactic adapted from military SERE training. This form of pressure is strategic. It's about disorientation, meant to erase a sense of hour, place, and self. An accelerated breakdown of psychological defenses. Interrogators might alternate between complete silence and sudden, jarring noises. Screams, door slams, bangs. The sound assaults would be played at random intervals to confuse him. Sleep wouldn't be always denied, but it would be disrupted frequently. Guards will yell, shake him, keep him hovering between exhaustion and anxiety. This specific sensory technique is designed not to inflict pain, but to deprive the mind of stimulation and overwhelm it simultaneously. The psychological toll can be immense. Victims subjected to this often report confusion, stress, and rapid mental deterioration within hours. This in itself would be enough to break a man's sanity. Hours 13 to 24. Bin Laden would now be subjected to what the CIA called enhanced interrogation techniques, many of which were inspired and adapted by how their enemies abused their soldiers. These included stress positions, standing upright with arms extended or crouched in a squat with back against a wall. Detainees would be in these positions often for hours on end, and in extreme cases, standing on broken feet. Naked isolation, designed to deprive a man of dignity and protection, leaving him at his most vulnerable. Walling. This involved encircling the detainee's neck with a collar or towel, then slamming them against a wall. Although a false wall was required to avoid injury, there have been classified cases of detainees being slammed against concrete. Rectal feeding. As well as being humiliating, this technique, used for when a prisoner refused food and a way of behavior control, entailed the insertion of a tube containing pureed food into the detainee's anal passage. Despite risks of damage or food rotting inside the digestive tract, as this was often done without medical necessity. Cold cells. Being left naked in rooms kept just above 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit, the freezing temperature. White noise, often blasted without pause. This would induce disorientation. Sleep deprivation. For up to 11 days, according to some declassified accounts, detainees could be kept awake by being shackled, forced to stand, or kept in stress positions. As a result of this, detainees could suffer from violent hallucinations, swollen legs, and reduced cognitive function. The goal here wouldn't be just to punish, it would be to break resistance, shatter identity, and rewire the mind into obedience. The logic behind these techniques comes from Cold War-era behavioral psychology, built on one foundational idea. If you remove a person's control over their environment, their food, light, warmth, routine, then they become psychologically pliable. This is learned helplessness. Add fear, real fear, and the result is compliance. Interrogators were instructed to exploit the following. Phobias. Unmuzzled attack dogs were used to threaten, while small coffin-like boxes were used as a way of confinement and taking advantage of claustrophobia. Cultural shame. Forced nudity while shackled became a form of sexual humiliation, and the shaving of beards was often used to strip a man of his cultural identity. Religious identity. Religion was mocked through dietary violations, forced enemas, and other assault. Dependency. All routines were often randomized. Food, toilet breaks, sleep. This not only confused detainees, but also broke their wills to resist. A 2008 U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee report found that these techniques were originally designed to help American troops resist torture. Created by the British during World War II to prepare individuals to resist interrogation while maintaining their physical and mental well-being, these tactics were reversed and weaponized by the CIA. Hours 25 to 30. Perhaps the most infamous tactic of all during this era of CIA interrogation was waterboarding, the wet towel treatment. Bin Laden would have been strapped to a slanted bench. A cloth would be laid over his face. Cold water would be poured. In seconds, the body would panic. Natural gag reflex, combined with simulated drowning. The lungs think that they're inhaling water. This isn't just painful. It triggers an evolutionary terror, death by asphyxiation. Over and over again. Former CIA officials claim that it worked, but experts, including FBI agent Ali Soufan, one of the lead interrogators of al-Qaeda agents, disagreed. Instead, they called it cruel, ineffective, and counterproductive. But what is legal in war? It depends on who's watching. The Geneva Conventions prohibit torture. The UN Convention Against Torture bans savage, inhumane treatment. But after 9/11, definitions blurred. After all, the US government sugarcoated what they were doing. They called these methods enhanced interrogation, not torture. No matter which military lawyers, international watchdogs, and American senators disagreed. The damage done wasn't just to detainees, it was to America's moral credibility. Hours 30 to 96. After the initial interrogation, methods may scale back, but the isolation remains, and the psychological campaign continues. Bin Laden would be placed in solitary confinement with no contact, no sense of the outside world, no sunlight, no human voice except orders. Meals would be slid through the slot in his concrete cell. Toilets and bathing would be on a strict schedule. This is called psychological attrition. The goal shifts from extraction to erosion. Interrogators would be instructed to keep bin Laden disoriented and to ensure no mental recovery. By day 7 in these circumstances, detainees often exhibit emotional breakdowns, paranoia, self-harm, regression, and hallucinations. These results aren't side effects, they're part of the method. For bin Laden, there would be no return to default, only the slow unraveling of his mind. After a week or so of the interrogation phase, with his intelligence value diminished, bin Laden would have likely been flown back, under military escort, to the United States. The highest security prison in the country is ADX Florence, located in Colorado, and we can assume that bin Laden would have probably ended up here. Often dubbed the Alcatraz of the Rockies, it's home to terrorists, spies, and domestic mass murderers, all sentenced without parole. Bin Laden would have joined a cast of the most dangerous men in America, including Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, fellow jihadists Ramzi Youssef and Richard Reed, and Mexican cartel leader Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. ADX Florence isn't just a prison, it's an engineered fortress of control. Every door is remote controlled. Every movement is tracked by motion detectors. Cells are soundproofed, windowless, and built from poured concrete. Steel barriers line every corner. Razor wire fences loom outside. Bin Laden would have been flown under heavy guard, probably in a military aircraft, escorted by marshals or special ops personnel. At ADX Florence, he would have to pass through multiple layers of security biometric scans, full body checks, and identification confirmation. Upon arrival, he would have undergone forced grooming, including the shaving of facial hair and head to remove any religious identifiers or personal customs. Medical exams and psychological assessments would then be conducted. Bin Laden would have spent 23 hours a day inside a 7 by 12-foot cell, the size of a parking space. A concrete slab bed, steel toilet and sink, a slit of a window designed to prevent a view of the outside world, a narrow slot for food. He might have been housed in the H Unit, reserved for terrorists. SHU, a special housing unit reserved for those who had newly arrived at the faculty. But it's most likely that he would have been housed in Range 13, reserved only for inmates in need of the tightest control. A special 4-cell wing within the SHU and the most restrictive space in the entire federal system. The daily routine? At 6 a.m., lights on, no alarm, just artificial dawn. At 7 a.m., a breakfast tray slides in, no human contact. Between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m., time passes. No hobbies are allowed unless approved. No visits unless completely monitored. At 1 p.m., 1 hour of recreational time is permitted. Alone in a slightly larger concrete box. No grass, no sky, no socialization. Between 2 p.m. and 10 p.m., more time in your cell. At 10 p.m., lights dim. Time for bed. Surveillance never ends. Repeat indefinitely. There is no garden, no yard. All reading material would be heavily monitored. No access to the internet or to broadcast media. Mail, if permitted, would be scanned and possibly redacted. Conversations with lawyers or family would be heavily supervised if allowed at all. Cameras and motion detectors track every movement. Research shows that long-term solitary confinement causes irreversible psychological damage. Depression, delirium, paranoia, memory loss, even for the most resilient. Former inmates describe it as dying while alive and living in a tomb. Experts say that solitary confinement for more than 15 days can cause irreversible harm. International bodies, including the United Nations, have condemned it, though U.S. courts have been slow to intervene. But for someone like Osama bin Laden, no one would call for reform. His cell would become a slow erasure of himself, a coffin made of concrete and silence. ADX Florence has been heavily criticized by multiple human rights organizations and mental health professionals. The Vera Institute, among others, reports severe psychological harm caused by prolonged confinement there. The UN Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners, also known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, emphasize rehabilitation, religious freedom, education, and humane treatment. ADX violates so many of these principles, especially in its use of isolation as a permanent condition. Yet, the U.S. government continues to defend the facility as a necessary tool to contain individuals whose crimes, influence, or ideologies could incite further violence. Had he lived, Osama bin Laden's imprisonment would have ignited global debate. Media coverage would be relentless. Every motion, appeal, and rumor of mistreatment would be filed by lawyers. His supporters would try and frame him as a political prisoner, while his opponents would demand his execution. The U.S. might have convened a military tribunal or a federal court trial. Either way, the logistics of court appearances would be monumental, and security would have to rival a head of state. In any regular prison, bin Laden's very presence could inspire unrest, both inside and outside, radicalization risks, and assassination attempts. The government would have needed to walk a tightrope thin line, balancing justice, security, and optics on the world stage. However, in ADX, it's unlikely that he would not have become a symbol or a martyr or a leader. Instead, he would have become an echo, a whisper, disappeared behind noise-proof walls in a prison designed not to punish, but to unmake. A broken shell of a man. What we've shown here is not fiction. Every hour described is based on documented practice, confirmed location, and real experience. What justice looks like is often shaped by power, not principle. In the end, Osama bin Laden's hypothetical cell at ADX would not just serve as a cage, but as a message. This is what the full force of the U.S. carceral state looks like when turned towards its ultimate enemy.